Alrighty, it's time for the first Spell Reflect guide of the season. And the first one up for us today is going to be Nokhud. And why is it going to be Nokhud offensive? Because I have been doing nothing but farming this stupid dungeon over and over and over again, trying to get this trinket, because it's it's an upgrade over what I have. The shoulders, legs, and ring are also eye level upgrades, so I can upgrade the current pieces I have to 509 for free. So I've just been farming it, and have not got my trinket to any avail. For some reason, I keep getting weapons this season. I've gotten 3 Quarry Slayer Glaives. Gotten 3 of those. One of these, I think I got one out of Azure Ball too. Like, I keep getting weapons instead of what I actually want. But on to the Spell Reflect bit of the guide is, bring it up here, and Nokhud is actually one of the areas, or one of the dungeons that has one of the highest potentials for Spell Reflect dungeon in this current dungeon set. There's some other things like Halls of Infusion has some special stuff going on. But let's talk about Nokhud Defensive, what we can use Spell Reflect for, what it's good for, and how do we get as much value out of it as possible. Also, I should say as well, it is subject to your bug tanks, whether or not some of these work. I find that Spell Reflecting on the last boss is actually fairly safe most of the time, because when you Spell Reflect it, obviously the mob is just running away from the tank. And at that point, the tank's like, hey, what the fuck? And they taunt them back automatically, because they're just used to that, right? So if you can time your Spell Reflects in the last boss, most of the time you can get those Reflects off for free without even having to worry about it. But I would recommend, unless you're actually talking to and communicating with your tank efficiently, that taunt reflecting on the Raging Tempest is going to be very, very deadly for you compared to the last boss. Even on a +9 Tyrannical, this last boss does, I think, 4.8 million per reflect. So the value is really there. I think it's 1.5 on a +9 for the Raging Tempest, and that number obviously only goes up as the key level increases. So, getting into the first area most people are going to go to is the Granith area with the Let Fly, blah, 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 right? There's not really anything major to Spell Reflect here. Everything here is really physical. A couple things you really need to look out for. The Lance Masters have a Disrupting Shout that does a large amount of damage, interrupts spell casting for 6 seconds. I didn't notice that ignores armor part, but that is a significant amount of damage. The other thing you need to worry about is the Beastmasters, and they Hunter's Mark, and then they hunt the prey, which they enrage their bird and send them after your healer. Many, many times in Season 1, I've seen my healer get run down by these birds. They did nerf this, but you can stun these abilities to make it not actually go off on your healer. But you're probably going to be a bit strapped for stuns anyway because of the Horn Sounders here. They provide a physical damage buff to everybody for 12 seconds, and depending on when these goes off, that buff can also work with Disruptive Shout, which does a ton of damage. So most of the time what I do is, if I can, I'll stun the Horn Sounders and I'll kick the Lance Masters. This first pull, normally people pull this roving pack with this pack, which has War Spears, Beastmasters, Longbowmen, Plane Stompers, Horn Sound. Like, one of the most dangerous things, especially when we're getting in on Fortified, is the fact that these guys are going to be targeting you, shooting you with bows. They'll require double kicks for both of these. In high keys, people are definitely going to double pull this with Lust almost every single time. But it is a very dangerous pull. But realistically, the only value we're actually going to get out of this entire area is on the boss itself, and it's the Shards of Stone. If the Eruption goes off, your party's just dead. If the Tectonic Stomp, you get hit by that, you're basically just dead. But the Shards of Stone is an uninterruptible, you can't deal with this ability. It's just basically the raid damage of the fight. It happens often enough where you can Spell Reflect it every single time. Get 20% damage reduction on that. It is very good, very juicy. So I'd highly recommend you do so at all times. Moving on to the Storm Zone, there actually is a decent amount of Reflect value you can get here. Most of the reflect value you're going to get is off of these Stormcaller big boys and just reflecting their Stormbolt. Even on a Tyrannical key right now at like a 9 or a 10, these are being reflected for 800 plus K every single time. So that can save your group a kick. But realistically, this pack is going to be pretty difficult because the Storm Speaker and the Stormcallers basically require kicks at all times. The Tempest cast needs to be kicked. The Summon Squall, he doesn't really, that's not that big of a deal. But this guy also casts Storm Bolts and Tempest and all kinds of stuff. So you're essentially going to have a group of 3 people on the main guy and then a couple people on this guy. Most of the time, because it's more deadly, especially in lower keys, I just make sure I'm kicking the Tempest every single time. Because if someone doesn't save a kick for it, that'll wipe your whole group. Whereas if someone doesn't kick the Stormbolt, generally people will live. On Fortified, I don't know, the Stormbolt might be one-shotting people, but currently on Tyrannical, I definitely focus on the Tempest. If the Tempest goes off, it puts a dot on you, you can get some value from reflecting, but realistically, save your reflect if you get targeted by the Stormbolts from the big Storm guys here. When you clear out this middle pack, what happened in Season 1 is people were skipping this Thunder Beast, but realistically, most people aren't going to skip this Thunder Beast because it's going to do a lot of damage. This Thunder Strike ability needs to be kicked. The thing that is annoying about it is you can reflect it, but the problem with this Thunder Strike is that you don't know who it's targeting. So you could try and let it go off and reflect, but if it doesn't hit you, you get no value out of it, right? And then it's wasted. Realistically, you're only pulling this guy by himself. I had someone pull this with these packs, and it just turned to a fucking mess. Because there's just too many things to kick, because the Thunderstrike does a ton of damage, even on Tyrannical. So, realistically, you're kicking these, you can reflect it. Most of the time, though, you're going to save your reflect for the Chain Lightning cast. If for some reason, nobody has kicks up, and you can just YOLO send a reflect, but otherwise, you're not really going to be doing much with that. But here's the boss where we actually start getting a lot of value from reflect. And it's because of this ability, Windburst. Windburst is something that is cast on anybody within 100 yards after pulling the boss. If you are the primary focus of the boss, so basically you have to taunt it, it'll cast the Windburst at you. Thankfully, this isn't like what we dealt with in, whatchamacallit. It's not like what we dealt with in the revamped Throne of the Tides, where the last boss had a cast that was 0.37 seconds long for the Ink Blast that you could reflect. Which you could do, and there's setups for it, but it's very difficult to do. But this one is a 1.1 second cast. The mob will literally turn and start casting at you. So realistically, if you just tell your tank, hey, I'm gonna reflect after this. If you see the mob turn towards me, just taunt it back. Because if you go out of range, he starts casting it instantly. But there's a high chance that you just die to this because of the strat I'm going to tell you. Which is one of the biggest damage instances of this fight is the Lightning Strike. Everybody gets a big AoE on them, and it does a big bolt of lightning and does a bunch of damage to you. Which we want to reduce that damage with Spell Reflect. So, what you can do is while you have the Lightning Strike on you, when the thing's about to explode and do damage, if you taunt the boss and reflect, you'll get the 20% magic DR from the Lightning Strike, as well as the boss will then turn and then cast at you, making it so you can get the value of the Reflect and the magical DR at the same time. Which is, when I start doing this in higher keys and I'm more coordinated, is probably what I'm going to do, because at a certain point, especially with Tyrannical bosses, you're going to need your defensives to live. So if we can use something like Lightning Strike to move away from the boss, taunt Reflect, have it be taunted back, and get the damage reduction and the damage from the reflect value, really good. So that's what I'm going to be planning on using it for, on this boss at least, but otherwise you can use it. Like during his Lightning Storm, his Electrical Storm cast is 15 seconds long. So if you're going into that Electrical Storm cast and you just have your Spell Reflect up, feel free to send it, and then it should be ready in time for the next Lightning Strike that you could potentially reflect to. I think on the second or third set of the second set of the Lightning Storm, he'll do a lightning storm right into a lightning strike, and that's pretty dangerous, especially for depending on what kind of healer you're rolling with, because some of them don't do well with spread, like Prez Evoker. So in some of those cases, maybe you don't taunt reflect that, but you can use Die by the Sword as a damage reduction instead. But realistically, that's what I'm planning on doing because double dipping is super nice. In this area, we're not really going to be getting much reflect value either, unless something bad happens. The reason why I say that is most of the damage coming out as far as casts are from these corruptors. They're going to be casting death bolts. These big guys that are on the platforms that you have to kill, all of them cast a volley and a shatter soul. You can this actually does a decent amount of damage to you. So what you can do is you can, while this cast is going out, just put your reflect up. So if it does hit you, it doesn't always hit you. It hits 3 players. So sometimes you're not being hit by it, but you can just have your reflect up while this cast is going out. I'm sure on Fortified, this thing is going to truck. So practicing having your DR for this is really good. One of the ways you're going to die here is these patrolling birds will get on top of one of these packs. And especially this first one here, it seems to happen a lot, where in really uncoordinated groups, everybody kind of sends their kicks on the Deathbolt volley. Someone might like go over here and like try and kick the Death Speaker or something. But if you have 5 birds, all 5 of them need to be kicked because they put a dot on the entire party that does a lot of damage. And especially if your kicks are all fucked up, it's going to do a lot of damage to you. So you can either, if something's going wrong, save your Spell Reflect for that kind of DR, or you have Die by the Sword for that kind of general DR. But having Spell Reflect for this nuke in the group, the Deathbolt volley can be kicked, and this nuke can't be kicked. So if you save Spell Reflect for that, that's good. This volley as well, some volleys can, but some volleys can't. This volley cannot be reflected, so don't try and reflect it. I mean, you can if you need some DR, but trying to reflect it for damage isn't going to help you out at all. And that's kind of this area. The main DR you're going to get from this is you're probably going to want to go Defensive Stance and Spell Reflect for these Gale Arrows and high Tyrannical keys. Even now, they're doing a lot of damage, but in really high Tyrannical keys, Gale Arrow is essentially going to be, at least to me, feels like it's going to be Soul Split from Atal Dazar all over again, right? It does a ton of damage. It is the only AoE damage that is guaranteed to hit you. The boss does do these little quick shots that do physical damage, so you can't really Spell Reflect those. But saving your Spell Reflect DR for the Gale Arrow is very important, because if you don't, there's a high chance it can kill you, especially as you actually start getting past that +10 level. This guy, he does have the Frightened Roar and the Aftershock, but realistically, if you get hit by these, you're kind of just dead. So don't be hit by these. Yay. I haven't tested it yet, but sometimes these abilities that put a CC on you, if they can't CC you, you immune the whole thing. So what I do need to test is if I can, like if I'm Blade Storming while this is going off, if I Blade Storm, if I even take the damage. Most likely I probably still do, but while I'm still farming these lower keys, it's probably something good for me to test. But here is where we get the value. Realistically, the way people path this dungeon, nobody really kills these packs ever. Like, even now, people aren't killing these packs. They did nerf them, so even when I did these, like, I've killed a couple of these, and they didn't really seem that bad. But it was obviously on Tyrannical. I don't know how it's going to look on Fortified. Well, I do wonder if these packs are ever going to be introduced into the route. But most of the time, either you are killing these mobs, or you are pulling everything at the same time and then feigning them off and doing the fight, which can be harder, and especially in high Tyrannical, the boss is going to have so much health that you probably are just going to want to kill these just so you have room. But there might be better strats that come out to efficiently use the space so you're not actually messing up the, not actually having to kill these mobs. Because they do give 6%, but they are pretty annoying to kill because one runs away and it could be a time waste, yada yada. But here is where the juice is. Here is the big juice. So I have a clip here that I'll play from this. I don't know why the data is wrong, but what you can do is, here's what I do. I stay away from the boss, but you can actually reflect almost, I'm pretty sure you can reflect every single conductive strike, or at least almost all of them, if you play it properly. I need more practice and my timing needs to get better. But if I would have spell reflected right now, where it says 1.9, if I would have spell reflected now, what this could have done, let me double check that you can even see this. If my, you can't. Okay, cool. Here we go. Here we are. So I almost fucked that up. But what you can do is, normally I stay away from the boss. This is what I was talking about, though, earlier. Where when you taunt the boss off the tank, the boss is just going to run at you. And the tank's going to go, hey, what the fuck? And then taunt it back. So if you spell reflect around the 2 seconds remaining, the way you can get this active, normally on your bigwigs, this actually doesn't show up. But if you go to your bigwigs, and you have to do this for a couple different abilities, and you'll go to dungeon bosses, Nokhud defensive, the last boss. If you go here to conductive strike, if you go here and unmark dispeller only, it'll actually show you the cooldown of this ability, and that way you can actually see it and anticipate it. This is on by default, and you won't be able to see when the cast is coming out. But if you uncheck this, then you'll be able to see it. But what you can do is you run away. If I spell reflected here, right? Spell reflect, run away, taunt the boss. On a +9, this is doing 4.8 million a cast. So this isn't that big of a deal. But you can see that conductive strike has about a 20-second cooldown. And that includes a little bit of time for spell queuing and then the cast. So you're not going to be able to get all of them, but you can get a pretty decent chunk of them. You'll see what I mean, because as the clip continues, my spell reflect, because I didn't time it correctly, almost comes up in time to save my tank. Because we go over here, my healer just dies. He does not bear form, so he dies. My hunter gets rolled over, and now we're fighting here. If I had, so we see the conductive strike is coming right here, and my spell reflect is 2 seconds off. So if I actually spell reflected just those couple seconds earlier, I could theoretically reflect every single conductive strike cast. I don't know the exact timing of it, right? So it is possible that what's going to end up happening is, let's say conductive strike is like 21 or 22 seconds. At a certain point, your spell reflect just won't be up in time for one of them if you pre-reflect it on the taunt. But because I didn't do that, I could have, which is something I'm going to work on improving, I could have saved my tank with my healer dead. But the one thing that is very nice about how this ability works and how conductive strike works is that, like a lot of abilities, one of the things they did to targeted tank abilities is that they make sure that these abilities have basically a billion-yard range. So with that being the case, that means that you don't have to be in melee range to actually reflect these things. So you'll see here, I'm running all the way away from the boss. Conductive strike is coming up. We will use it here to kill the boss. And we did it! Yay! But this is what you can... But these are some of the things that you can do. I think the last boss is very doable, even in pugs, mainly because the tank is going to see the boss running away from you. But otherwise, that's kind of Nokhud defensive. There's a couple decent things you can do. There's definitely some good value out of these dungeons that you can get from spell reflecting. And normally, honestly, I really didn't like Nokhud for a while because it was a long dungeon. But because of the amount of things that you actually can reflect and the actual value we can get out of our class, more so than anything else, I've really started to kind of turn on the dungeon, and I've been liking it a lot more. But that's it for the Spell Reflect guide. I hope it helps you, and welcome to the start of my content for Season 4. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a good one. Bye-bye.